I'm going to be making my mom's recipe for her yeast rolls that she always made for Thanksgiving. This same recipe can be sweetened up and made for cinnamon rolls or any kind of other kind of like dessert bread, but today it's going to be the yeast roll version. And I'll just go over the ingredients really quick. Now I'm going to be doubling this batch because it's a family favorite, and we're going to be taking some of them over for our family Thanksgiving and then leaving some here for us to eat with leftover turkey and whatnot. Okay, so in this measuring cup I have 1 cup of warm water, and I have 4 packets of quick active yeast that's proofing, and it's starting to get foamy, so that makes you know that your yeast is good. Then it called for shortening, but I don't have any shortening, so I'm using margarine. I don't usually keep margarine in the house, but if you don't have a problem with dairy, you could substitute butter, but since I have a dairy issue, I have to use margarine. So you're going to need a cup of that. We've got flour here, salt, honey, and eggs. Now it calls for 4 eggs, but I'm going to be using duck eggs, and duck eggs are larger than chicken eggs, so I'm only going to be using 3. And that is basically all of the ingredients. It's a pretty simple recipe. Oh, I almost forgot. And I have milk here. This is cashew milk. If you don't have a dairy issue, then you would need to use cow's milk or any kind of milk that you want, really. So what you do then is you dissolve the yeast in water, which I've done. Then you put some of the flour. It's going to call for a lot of flour. So a double batch, it says about 14 cups of flour. But when you're working with yeast dough, it always just kind of depends. It depends on the humidity and everything else. So I never really worry about measuring the flour. I just go until it's the right consistency. So I'm just going to start by scooping several cups of flour into this big bowl. Start with 4 cups of flour in the bowl. And then to that, you just add all of the other ingredients. So I'm going to add the milk. And I warmed the milk on the stove. Now you want it to be warm, not hot. And the reason why you warm it is so that the yeast has a nice environment. If it's too hot, then it'll kill the yeast. And if it's too cold, the yeast will still work, but it will just take longer for your dough to rise. So I mixed in my milk, and then I'm going to go ahead and put the eggs in. And like all farm eggs, I crack them into a separate bowl first, just to make sure there's nothing funny going on. Let me get my towel here. I always like to keep a towel on hand to wipe my fingers. So throw 1 egg in. Duck eggs have a very thick shell. But duck eggs are very good in baked goods. They're rich, and they have a higher fat content, a little bit higher than a chicken egg. And so they just really make your baked goods turn out really nice. Okay. And like I said, if you were using chicken eggs, you would want 4 eggs. But if you look at the size of these eggs, duck eggs are a lot bigger than chicken eggs. So I'm going to go ahead and stir that in. And you don't have to stir after, adding every ingredient. I'm just it kind of makes it a little easier to incorporate things, especially when you're doing a double batch like this, because you're going to have a huge amount of dough by the time this is all done. Okay, so we've got our milk. Now let's add our shortening, or in this case it is margarine. And I need, what did I say? I need 1 cup. And this recipe came out of my mom's Betty Crocker cookbook. So if any of you guys have an old-timey Betty Crocker cookbook, then you should find this. And it's on page 108 in the old-timey Betty Crocker cookbook. Okay, so that's pretty close to a cup of butter. Pepper, that was me. It was nothing. Okay, move that out of the way. And then we need a cup of honey. Now the recipe calls for sugar, but I like to use honey in my baked goods, my yeast rolls and yeast breads, because it keeps the finished product from getting dried out too quickly. That's one of the problems with like homemade breads. They tend to dry out really fast, and if you put honey in instead of sugar, it keeps the finished product from drying out so quick. Okay, so 1 cup of honey. Yes, this is a rich dough, but this will make a lot of dinner rolls. And I only make this, I make the rolls at Thanksgiving, and then I make the same dough and I make cinnamon rolls and a pineapple braid at Christmas. And that's the only time of the year that I make this recipe. My kids love it. They wish I made it all the time, but we don't need it. We don't need it all the time. Okay, so we'll go ahead and incorporate this in. Now if I was only making a single recipe, I would use my KitchenAid mixer, but I already know that there's no way this would fit in the bowl of my KitchenAid, so I'm doing it the way my mom always did, which was by hand. So far we've got the part of the flour, the milk, honey, eggs, shortening. Need to add the salt, and it calls for 4 teaspoons of salt. And I'm using the pink Himalayan. Stir the salt in. Okay, so now I'm going to add the yeast mixture. This is what does the magic. Now I'm going to have to start stirring a little more carefully because it'll slop out. So I'm going to double check my recipe one more time, make sure I have all the ingredients in. Water, yeast, milk, sugar, salt, eggs, shortening. Now, this is pretty incorporated, but obviously this is going to need a lot more flour. So we'll go ahead and start adding flour cup by cup until it is the consistency that you can handle. So this is going to take a little bit of time to get all of this flour incorporated. So I'll shut you off, and once this is all ready for the kneading process, then we'll be back. kind of looks like a big old gloppy mess right now, and it is still pretty soft, but it's easier when you're working with this much dough. As soon as possible that you can work it with your hands, the better. So you just want to start kneading the dough, and you're going to want plenty of flour at this point because it's still pretty sticky. And kneading is just basically where you take the end and you pull it over and you push it down with the palms of your hands. And I've got a bench scraper here too if I need to scrape the dough up off the counter. So you want to just keep kneading this until it's no longer sticky, and it resembles, I don't know, I always think it kind of looks like a little baby's bottom when it's been kneaded perfectly. It's nice and smooth, and nice and smooth, I guess is what I would say. So this is getting really pretty good pretty quick here, and you want to knead once it's not sticky anymore and it's got pretty much enough flour in the dough. You want to knead for at least 5 minutes. Now, like I said, if I was doing a smaller batch, I would do pretty much the whole process in my KitchenAid, because I have a dough hook and it does a pretty decent job of kneading the dough to the right consistency. But because this is such a large amount, you'd really need a institutional size mixer or a restaurant size mixer to handle this much dough. Now you can see it's still pretty sticky, so you just want to put some more flour on it and just keep on kneading. And just look at it this way. It's like the workout before the big Thanksgiving meal. Working off all those calories before you consume them. It really is a good arm workout. I would bet people that work in bakeries that do this by hand, not the big bakeries like Wonder Bread, but the family-owned small bakery shops, they probably have quite the biceps on them from kneading this dough. So anyway, I'm just going to keep working on this until it is perfect, and when it's exactly the way I want it, we'll be back and I'll show you what I mean when I say it looks like a baby's bottom. Like what I mean by like a little baby's bottom. It's nice and soft and smooth, and it's just a tiny bit sticky yet. If you made it so it was not sticky at all, then there would be too much flour in the dough and you wouldn't like the results. So I went ahead and we divided the dough in half, and I kneaded half and Olivia kneaded half, mainly because that was a lot of dough to try to knead perfectly, and also I wanted to divide it into two separate bowls to rise, because if we put this much dough in one bowl, it would spill over the top of the bowl, and I don't want that to happen. So what you need to do then is I just took 2 bowls that we mixed the dough in, and we put oil in the bottom of the pan and the bowl, and then you just flop the dough in, roll it around, and then flip it over so the oily side is up. Now, my mother always would take a tea towel, a clean kitchen tea towel, wet it down, and cover the bowl with the wet tea towel. Now this is going to go in our oven, obviously not turned on, but we have a gas oven, so the pilot light produces just enough heat to be the perfect environment for this dough to rise. So we're going to go ahead and do this piece. And the oil acts for 2 purposes. It keeps the dough from drying out, and it also helps it rise. It rises up those sides because it's slippery and greasy. And these tea towels, these wet tea towels, are nice because I can wipe the grease off the oil off my hands. So we'll cover this one up and we're going to stick them in the oven. They have to rise till they're about double, which totally depends. Could be an hour, could be an hour and a half. We're going to punch it down, let it rise again for about a half hour. Then we're going to punch it down, form them into rolls, let them rise one more time, which only takes about 15 minutes, and then we're going to bake them off. So we'll be back after this has risen its first time, after its first rising. So there we go. Waiting for them to rise. It's almost too much to go in one oven. There we go. Okay, things kind of got a little bit crazy around here about the time that the dough was had its first rising, as things tend to do on a holiday. So this is the third rising. You let the dough rise, then you punch it down, you let it rise again, punch it down, and form it into whatever shape roll you want, and then you let it rise a third time, and then you bake it at 400 degrees for 12 to 15 minutes or till golden brown. So these are just about ready to go in the oven. They'll be in the oven pretty soon, and when they come out I'll show you what they look like. You hear me over the ruckus, but there's the dinner rolls all done, and you can hear my family in the background laughing. And here's the rest of the spread. 2 types of cranberry, all the turkey, mashed potatoes, 2 different kinds of sweet potatoes, 2 little ones, stuffing, corn, baked beans, and a gallon of gravy. Here's my plate.
You can stand in there with
Pumpkin pie and Dutch apple pie and cute little cupcakes with acorns, pecan pie, and my coconut pie.
where do you want me to put the cooler?